Look, look how you bite off. Look. Look here.
I'll link you up later, stop. Just want to show you. Okay? I don't know. No, you want anything? It's on me. Alright. Yo, boss man.
I define Toronto slang as almost like the melting pot of a bunch of like POC.
I would describe it as very diverse. I use patois more when I'm at home and more comfortable. Like, I don't really use it in my slang nowadays. I don't really know why. I think it's ties into like the code switching thing. Like when I'm outside, I kind of feel more nervous to sort of express myself.
I'm located in downtown Toronto and I've lived here all my life. I find myself almost all the time not using it, only because when I was younger, it was almost seen as dirty and like ghetto stuff going on. And so when I got older, I felt like I needed to like create a more white washed version of how I spoke, especially when I was in very big public spaces.
I was born and raised in Toronto, but like I spent most of my upbringing in Scarborough, and I basically lived in Scarborough like my entire life. I use Toronto slang basically all the time. Like I feel like in college, because we live in Oakville, there's a lot of spaces where, you know, black people or just like POC voices don't really necessarily feel that comfortable. They have to sort of force assimilate to be more acceptable in white spaces.
I don't like the fact that it's called Toronto slang, solely for the fact that it didn't derive from Toronto. Again, like I said, it's a mixture of a bunch of different languages and cultures, almost stolen to create their own. And just calling it Toronto slang, it is the whitewashing of culture and language, and it is changing the perception of how you think about certain things and certain words.
There are a lot of people who kind of use it as a base for their platform, or like a way to be funny, or a way to like entertain people.
In society, what is white is right, and there's anti-blackness just everywhere. You can't really meet people with that sort of voice or with that sort of look, and especially with white people, like, or with non-black people, you're not really going to be accepted, or you're automatically going to be looked as a particular way when you're not. You're just going to be looked at as like this one-sided person.
Of course, I've been racially profiled as a black trans woman in Toronto.
I was working at a grocery store, and like the manager was having like, he kept mixing up my name with a bunch of the names of like other black employees. And some of the other black employees, they weren't as well behaved. And I was trying to become a supervisor, so it was like I kind of got lumped into the trouble of them, even though I wasn't a part of them. And I think that was like blatant racial profiling from the manager's point, and he didn't realize that.
I remember just wanting to apply for a specific class, which had like a certain level of academia. And I specifically remember the teacher basically thinking I was like another black student, and essentially telling me that like I would never do good in her class, and that I don't have the academic capacity to pay attention in her class.
I do know a particular person that I went to high school with, who was your classic, you know, Toronto hoodman. Like, he wore the clothes, he had the voice, everything. I just constantly saw him and boys like him, like, you know, face this sort of backlash from other students, educators, like all these sort of people that he should be looking up to, people who should, you know, be giving him the same amount of opportunities as other people. I definitely think that Toronto slang should be something for everyone's enjoyment.
I think that the lines are always just kind of changing, shifting. Nobody really knows exactly like what culture is what in some cases. However, I do think that you need to be educated in the choices that you're making when you're presenting yourself.
I think that's where the line ends, and where it needs to be called out as discriminatory and not just everyday language.
At the end of the day, yes, you know, Toronto slang is funny and it's, you know, something fun to take part in, but let's also not forget about who is the Toronto man and what does he look like? What are his dreams, like his aspirations? What are his goals? Like, what does he see for himself in the future? And he's not one-noted. Like, he's not a monolith. None of us are. It's about time that Toronto has this conversation because it's long overdue.
McDonald's fan. Chinese fan, bread fan. I'm on bread fan. This guy's dissing you. Why you moving like that? Just
Not even first period in this game.
Let me see.